Welcome to BioMed Explorer. In this video, I'd like to talk about two organs that almost nobody thinks of as related, but that share a strange trait most people never notice: the pancreas and the gonads. I'll cover what each of these organs actually is, how the pancreas is secretly running two completely different jobs out of the same building, how a constant push and pull between two hormones keeps your blood sugar from swinging wildly in either direction, how the gonads are controlled by a chain of command stretching all the way up to the brain, what happens when either system breaks down, and why both of these organs, despite doing wildly different work, end up governed by the exact same kind of feedback loop. So let's get started. What is the pancreas really? Most people picture the pancreas as a single, simple organ tucked somewhere behind the stomach, quietly helping with digestion. But here's something that surprises a lot of people. The pancreas is actually running two entirely separate operations at once, and only one of them has anything to do with hormones. The pancreas sits like a long, flattened wedge behind the lower half of the stomach, and about 95% of it is dedicated to what's called exocrine work, producing digestive enzymes and dumping them straight into the small intestine to break down the food you eat. But scattered through that digestive tissue, like tiny islands in a much larger sea, sit clusters of cells called the pancreatic islets, formerly known as the islets of Langerhans. These islands make up barely 1 or 2% of the entire organ, and yet they're responsible for one of the most tightly regulated systems in your entire body: blood sugar control. The islands with 4 different jobs. Inside those tiny clusters, there isn't just one type of cell doing one job. There are several, each manufacturing a completely different hormone and each answering to a different part of the equation. The alpha cells, making up roughly a fifth of each island, produce glucagon, a hormone whose entire purpose is raising blood sugar when it starts to run low, largely by telling the liver to break down its stored glycogen and release glucose into the bloodstream. The beta cells, the largest group by far, produce insulin, the hormone responsible for doing the exact opposite, pulling glucose out of the bloodstream and into cells where it can actually be used for energy. The delta cells, a smaller group, produce somatostatin, which acts almost like a moderator, quietly dialing down both insulin and glucagon so neither one overreacts. And a fourth, even smaller group, the gamma cells, produce pancreatic polypeptide, which helps regulate how quickly the stomach empties and how much digestive enzyme gets released in the first place. 4 different cell types, 4 different hormones, all packed into structures smaller than a grain of rice, and together they decide minute by minute whether your blood sugar climbs, falls, or holds steady. It's a bit like a thermostat with several separate technicians instead of one, each watching the same reading and only stepping in when their particular adjustment is needed. The blood sugar dial. Here's a detail that catches almost everyone off guard. Insulin and glucagon aren't just 2 separate hormones doing their own thing. They're locked in a constant push and pull relationship, each one canceling out the other depending on what your body needs in that exact moment. After a meal, blood sugar rises as digested carbohydrates flood into the bloodstream, and the beta cells respond almost immediately, releasing insulin to usher that glucose into muscle, fat, and liver cells before levels climb dangerously high. Insulin doesn't just wave glucose into cells either. It actively prompts the liver and muscles to convert some of that glucose into glycogen, a storable form that can be called back on later, essentially banking the surplus for a moment when it's needed again. Hours later, once that glucose has been used up and blood sugar starts drifting downward, the alpha cells take over, releasing glucagon to prompt the liver into breaking that same glycogen back down and releasing it into the bloodstream, bringing blood sugar back up again. It's a constant back and forth, insulin pulling the level down, glucagon pushing it back up, running quietly in the background every single hour of every single day, whether you're eating, sleeping, or just sitting still. And it's precisely this balance that keeps your blood sugar sitting in a narrow, stable range rather than swinging wildly with every meal you eat. When the pancreas breaks down, Given how precisely this system needs to run, it's no surprise that when it fails, the consequences show up quickly and clearly. Type 1 diabetes happens when the immune system mistakenly destroys the insulin-producing beta cells, usually early in life, leaving the body with little or no ability to move glucose out of the bloodstream at all, which is why it requires lifelong insulin replacement. Type 2 diabetes develops differently and usually much more gradually, as cells throughout the body slowly become resistant to insulin signal, forcing the beta cells to work harder and harder to compensate until eventually they can't keep up anymore. Both conditions ultimately trace back to the same tiny structures, those scattered islands making up barely a fraction of the organ's total size. What are the gonads, really? Now let's shift to the second organ pair in this video, the gonads, the testes in men and the ovaries in women. And just like the pancreas, these organs are quietly running two jobs at once, producing the cells needed for reproduction and manufacturing the hormones that shape almost everything about how the body looks, grows, and functions. Inside the testes, specialized cells called Leydig cells manufacture testosterone, the hormone responsible for muscle mass, bone density, body hair, and sex drive, while a separate population called Sertoli cells manages the actual production of sperm. Inside the ovaries, the story is a little more cyclical. Developing follicles produce estradiol, the primary form of estrogen, and after an egg is released each month, the structure left behind, called the corpus luteum, produces progesterone, a hormone that prepares the body to potentially sustain a pregnancy. The chain of command running the whole thing. Here's the part that surprises people almost every time. The gonads don't decide on their own how much hormone to produce. They're taking orders from a chain of command running all the way up through the brain, called the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, or HPG axis for short. It starts in the hypothalamus, which releases small pulses of a signal called gonadotropin-releasing hormone, GnRH, directly into the pituitary gland sitting just beneath it. And here's a detail most people never picture correctly. GnRH doesn't flow continuously. It arrives in short, rhythmic pulses, and that pulsing pattern is exactly what keeps the pituitary responsive, since constant, unbroken exposure to the same signal would actually cause the pituitary to stop listening altogether. In response to those pulses, the pituitary releases two hormones, luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone, LH and FSH, which then travel through the bloodstream and instruct the gonads on exactly what to do. In the testes, LH tells the Leydig cells to produce testosterone, while FSH keeps the Sertoli cells supporting sperm production. In the ovaries, that same pair of hormones drives the monthly cycle, prompting a group of follicles to mature, selecting one dominant follicle to release its egg, triggering ovulation, and then supporting the corpus luteum afterward as it produces progesterone. And once enough testosterone, estrogen, or progesterone is circulating, that hormone signals back up to the hypothalamus and pituitary to ease off, a constant feedback loop keeping the whole system from running unchecked in either direction, rising when levels dip too low and pulling back the moment they climb too high. When the gonadal system breaks down, just like the pancreas, when this chain of command gets disrupted, the effects tend to ripple through the entire body rather than staying contained to one small area. In men, declining testosterone with age can bring fatigue, reduced muscle mass, and lower bone density, while a disruption higher up in the chain, at the hypothalamus or pituitary, can suppress testosterone production even when the testes themselves are perfectly healthy. In women, menopause represents the ovaries gradually running out of responsive follicles, causing estrogen and progesterone to decline and prompting the well-known symptoms that follow, while conditions like polycystic ovary syndrome involve the hormonal signaling within that same axis becoming imbalanced, disrupting ovulation and cycle regularity. In both cases, the problem often isn't the gonads acting up on their own. It's a breakdown somewhere along that long chain running from the brain all the way down. Two organs, the same underlying design. So now that we've covered both organ systems, let's bring it together, because underneath two completely different jobs, digestion and blood sugar on one side, reproduction and sexual development on the other, both the pancreas and the gonads run on the exact same underlying design. Both are structured around a small population of specialized cells hidden inside a much larger organ, doing work wildly out of proportion to their size. Both rely on opposing or paired hormones working in tandem, insulin and glucagon pulling blood sugar in opposite directions, testosterone and estrogen shaping the body in different ways depending on which one dominates. And both are governed by feedback loops that constantly sense the current hormone level and adjust output accordingly, rather than simply producing hormones nonstop without any regulation at all. Wrapping it up, there you have it. The pancreas and the gonads, two organ systems that seem to have nothing in common on the surface, quietly built on the same biological blueprint underneath. Small clusters of specialized cells, opposing hormones working in balance, and a feedback loop constantly listening and adjusting. Between blood sugar control and reproduction, these organs are deciding some of the most fundamental things about how your body runs, almost entirely without your conscious input. Thanks for watching, and BioMed Explorer uploads a new science video every day. Please subscribe and share.